Here to welcome you all this evening, I'd like to introduce Rick Burke, Stat's co-founder and executive editor.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone, for coming to this beautiful space. I know you had a lot of choices tonight because there's like 80 million things going on right now, and you choose to come here, and we really appreciate it. And we all know it's a little bit of a scary time for biotech. We had a story the other day where we interviewed about 100 people who are sort of JP types that come to these events, and more than 70% said they're worried about financing, raising in the coming year, raising VC money, money for R&D. They're worried about the ability to launch an IPO. There's real concern out there, but there's also excitement, as we've seen today. We had a story today that our reporters wrote about, 4 acquisitions worth $45 billion today that were reported. Just evidence of activity and growth. The thing I just wanted to tell you all is our commitment at STAT to cover the world of health, medicine, biotech. I would humbly say that we have the best team anywhere covering these issues in terms of the authority, the years of experience, the ambition, and the hard work. If you've read our readout at JPM newsletter in the last couple of days, it's coming out every day, you'll see some evidence of how we're sort of in every corner of this JPM confab. We have, I think, total, when you add our entire staff, we have about 20 people here at JPM, which I think is the largest we've had in our 8-year history, almost 8-year history. And I just want to also say that we're continuing to grow STAT. We're adding a bunch of coverage areas. We've just added a cardiovascular reporter. We have several reporters here who are new to the beat. We have a new, fairly new West Coast biotech reporter. We have new health tech reporters. We're sending a reporter to Europe a little bit later this year to cover biotech there, because our readers they're clamoring for, when we ask them, what more do you want from STAT? And they're telling us more European biotech. Is that true? Do you want that? What else do you want from us? Yell it out. What aren't we covering? Anything? Shout it out. All right, well, that means we're doing it all, right? Okay. I also just want to make sure, besides our daily coverage, besides our morning newsletters that you're reading, that you're listening to our Read Out Loud Biotech podcast every Thursday. You all love it, right? And I think Thursday, am I right, Adam? Thursday we're going to have a recap of this week. Okay. And the final thing I just wanted to mention is I have to assume that all of you are Stat Plus subscribers, but is that true? If you're not, I can't imagine you're being here and not subscribing. If you're not, we are offering a special for everyone at JPM, a special 10% off a whole year's subscription if you type in the code JPM23. If you want a 10% off a year's subscription. Also, if you're too cheap or you don't want to spend the money yourself, which I can't imagine because you came all the way out here, we do have a whole subscription program where you can get your company to buy, thousands of subscriptions and not have to pay for it yourself. And so just keep that in mind. And finally, I just, again, want to thank you all for coming and thank GSK for sponsoring tonight's event. And without further ado, I think Matt is coming back on stage.
On behalf of our presenting sponsor, GSK, please welcome John Lepore, Senior Vice President and Head of Research at GSK. Thank you, John.
Hey, John.
Tough act to follow. I don't have as many notes. Really thrilled to be able to sponsor this event and to see a lot of former and hopefully future colleagues. And I wanted to just start by just giving you a little bit of insight to how GSK thinks about innovation. And when I reflect back at my career starting as a physician scientist, it was really sort of a tough scenario to look after. Very little was known about the pathogenesis of most diseases. It was really daunting to think about the size and complexity of clinical studies and the barriers to get to an approved medicine and the low probability of success from going from a target to an approved medicine was staggering. But most of that hasn't really changed, as all of you know, despite some important breakthroughs. And I wanted to share with you how GSK thinks about innovation in this space and what we're doing to try to solve this problem of low probability of success. The first step, of course, is to find the best drug targets. And here we've really anchored on the power of human genetics to identify the best drug targets. And what that's anchored on is the observation that targets with genetic validation have about twice the chance of becoming an approved medicine. And so we've invested very heavily in this space. We've got a lot of key partners. One of them is 23andMe, whom we've had a 5-year collaboration with. And we now have about 50 active programs centered around their database, the genetic database, which is the largest in the world. And in fact, our portfolio is about 70% of the targets and all of the medicines having strong genetic validation. The second step, though, is a little trickier, and that's to really understand the function of those potential targets. And what we've encountered is that about 50% of the targets we identify through human genetics, very little is known about the biology of those targets. So we've got to figure it out. So how do we figure it out? One of the ways is through investing in functional genomics. What I mean by that is the design of very specific human, cellular, disease-relevant models, and then studying gene by gene what are the activities, the biological function of genes. And we've established quite a few collaborations in there, but one of the really important ones is with the Laboratory of Genomic Research, and I'm really delighted by my colleague Fyodor Ornov is going to be on a panel with me later to talk about that in more detail. The third step is to get the best modality. And here too, I want to frame up how strong partnerships is what is enabling us to be successful in this space. And just a couple of years back, it was really small molecules and antibodies, single target antibodies. But there's been really an explosion of new potential modalities, and I'm really excited about a couple of new collaborations we have in this space. One of them is with WuXi Biologics, where we've just licensed access to their bispecific T-cell engaging antibodies. And then another one is with Wave Life Sciences to access their oligonucleotide platform. And what's really cool about their platform is it has 3 different RNA targeting modalities, silencing, but also splicing and editing. And we're really excited about sharing our human genetic targets with their platform and together making important new medicines. And finally, in vaccines, we've got some other key collaborations. We work closely with CureVac on new mRNA technologies, and we recently completed an acquisition of Affinivax, where we've got a very novel approach called MAPS that allows very high valency of pneumococcal vaccine. And then finally, the last step is to really understand how to get these new medicines with the right modality into the right patient population. And there we're investing in large data sets so we could really understand deeply the variability of disease in patient populations and match the right medicine to those patients. And we've just done a very large collaboration with Tempus in oncology to do exactly that. So, when I look back, I started with, well, it sounded very daunting. As I look forward, based on the science that we're involved in through these various collaborations, I'm actually very optimistic about the future, and I'm delighted to have an opportunity to sponsor this event and to share some discussion with you about how we're approaching this and how you are as well. So thank you, and really appreciate your joining. I'll turn over to Matt, I believe, right?
All right, I'd like to welcome Dr. Robert Califf, the FDA Commissioner, to the stage. And while he's coming up, getting his mic, I'm going to say a few words. He is, Dr. Califf previously served as the FDA Commissioner in 2016 and 2017 under President Barack Obama. In between, he worked at Alphabet, trying to figure out ways to use technology to fix the myriad problems in our healthcare system. But before that, he was already in the medical textbooks. He's one of the most important clinical trialists of the recent era and has been a longtime crusader for collecting strong and reliable data about drugs and medical devices so that doctors, patients, and all of us can make the right decisions when we're in the most difficult moments of our lives. So I just want to, before we get started, thank Dr. Califf for being here. Okay, so then I'm going to fumble with my notes.
I'm shocked that Matt needs notes.
Well, I want to read some stuff to you. In fact, so, and you knew when you took this job that there were going to probably be controversy after controversy, because it's what happens to everyone who takes this job. But I want to start with a recent one. I'm just going to skip that and just go straight to recently, two House committees, Energy and Oversight and Commerce, issued a report on the Alzheimer's drug Aduhelm, which our publication has reported on extensively. I just want to read from it briefly. The findings in this report raise serious concerns about FDA's lapses in protocol and Biogen's disregard of efficacy and access in the approval process for Aduhelm. The findings also justify experts' and stakeholders' concerns about FDA's accelerated approval of Aduhelm. The criticism surrounding Aduhelm's approval may have been avoided had FDA adhered to its own guidance and internal practices. So, the first thing I want to ask you is, this is not the first time you've heard this or read it. I'm sure you've read the report. What was your reaction? What is your reaction? What do you...
First, Matt, have you ever seen an oversight committee report that said, these guys did a great job, we applaud them for their tremendous work? If you read the report...
Well, for a long time, I hadn't seen a briefing document which was written with the company.
Well, hold on. Now, as you well know, Matt, and I would say Rick, John just gave, I think, a really nice depiction of the old days and the new days. I would add one more thing to it that I think is really important. Early in my career, companies would try to develop drugs, they would fumble around, they would submit applications, a very high percentage of which were not very good, had a low probability of success. And then through the user fee programs, a lot of work went into the question of how do you interact during the course of drug development. The biggest impact of that that's been positive is early on, things that aren't going to work never get submitted because they get killed early. That is good for patients because they don't get exposed to treatments that aren't going to work. It's good for society because the investments aren't wasted on things that aren't going to work. But let's say you get all the way to the end of phase 3. I used to do large clinical trials. We would have a database at Duke. The company would have a database, and the FDA would have data. There are always issues and discrepancies and things that need to be resolved. So the idea that the FDA should not be interacting with companies doesn't make any sense.
I think that's a straw man, Rob. I don't think anyone's saying that the FDA should not be interacting with companies.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad you see that.
Yeah, I think we can settle that. But I think the question here is, look, I mean, if we could put it in the context of an interview, but just to remove it a little bit, if my kid is going to school and his English teacher is incredibly responsive tells him what he needs to do. I'm going to say, what a great English teacher. If she writes the paper with him, I'm not sure that's actually learning the material. I mean, I think one of the fundamental questions here is, can the system work? Is there a line that you can cross? That's what people are asking, not saying, no one wants to go back to the days when applications failed just because there was bad communication between the FDA and the sponsor.
In an enterprise that's complicated, of course there are lines you shouldn't cross. There are also gray zones that are complex and difficult and from which you can definitely learn. I would say, one of the things I would point to in the report that is important is when interactions occur, they should be documented. That was a lapse that was recognized and it's being dealt with.
How is it being dealt with?
By enforcing the rules that you document it when you have interactions. That's pretty straightforward.
Okay. I want to step back to that first question. You picked up that report. What's the FDA commissioner's reaction to it?
There were no surprises in the report. The language is inflammatory, I think on purpose, because that's what oversight committees do. Almost everything in the report I'm not arguing with in terms of the content, which is what I was trying to say before you change the topic a little bit. If you read the details of the report, the actual details are pretty straightforward. And, there can be opinions about the decision. Was it the right decision? But there's nothing that was done with the data that changed the basic data. So I think the report is reasonable. The language is inflammatory. I've learned not to pay a lot of attention to inflammatory language, but to focus on the content.
Has the report resulted in any other changes to how the agency operates?
It's resulted in a lot of introspection. One that I would point to is advisory committees. We got work to do with the advisory committees to optimize them across the FDA. There's a long history here of how things have evolved, but I think it's fair to say the interaction with the advisory committee here was not optimal. And, we've talked about this
What do you
before.
mean by not optimal? Because I've seen you on advisory committees over the years.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember the advisory committee where your involvement led to the regulations around diabetes drugs that probably led to all the breakthroughs we've seen in the past few years, because there was a requirement that companies had to hop over, that the medicines prevented heart attacks. I can't imagine the FDA back then. There was always this statement the FDA does not, that we put in stories, the FDA does not have to follow the advice of its advisory committees. But it usually does. But I can't imagine kind of the way I felt this committee was ignored when you were on those committees.
Well, another way of saying what you were saying is advisory committees are advisory. So I think saying following the advice of advisory committees is not the proper context for looking at advisory committees. The FDA has access to a tremendous amount of data. It needs to interact with outside people that have expertise and knowledge to bring to bear. In many circumstances, the FDA is not asking, should this drug be approved? They want to understand, there's a need to understand better the context in which the data are being considered. So if you look, there's empirical data on this, as you well know. If you said, we're going to try to pigeonhole whether the advisory committee was recommending to approve the treatment or not, over 20% of the time there's some disagreement. On average, the FDA is more stringent than the advisory committee votes, but it goes both ways. So I'm not looking for exact concordance, but I think, the sort of public playing out of this, probably could have been handled better by going back to the advisory committee. I've said that before. That's not anything new. But we have to work.
I have to say, a lot of the people we talk to have been surprised. People who used to work at the FDA, stakeholders, not only here, but also with the boosters, by the lack of use of advisory committees by the FDA over the past couple years, by not that you're not using them more. And they worry. You talk a lot about misinformation. They worry about about public faith in the enterprise without that open hearing.
Yeah, so this is an issue that we're dealing with. We need to use advisory committees better across the entire FDA. You know, if you read the tobacco report, the TIPS Act, the Tobacco Advisory Committee hasn't met in over 2 years. If you read the foods report, there hasn't been an advisory committee on the food side since 2017. Over the course of this year, we'll bring out a lot of the reasons why that's occurring. They are complicated and has a lot to do with the complex information environment that we're in. The more we deal with rare diseases, I'll just give you one example that I've thought a lot about that we're going to have to figure out. If you say there's a rare disease and there are only a few experts in the world, how many of those experts are unlikely to be working on therapeutics or diagnostics for that rare disease? And yet you may need advice, which really represents expert advice. It's a complicated issue, and there are many other similar issues that we need to deal with for advisory committees. But the FDA will only do well if it's in tune with the scientific and clinical communities and the patient groups, so all need to be represented.
Do you think the FDA is in tune right now?
I think generally it is, but it could always be better.
How do you think it could be better?
In the course of interchange, well, let's take patient advocacy groups. You know, there are thousands of rare diseases. Some of them are very well represented by aggressive and effective advocates, some aren't. I think we have an obligation to bring out those diseases that may not be so well represented, because it's been obvious to me they don't do as well in terms of attracting investment, science interest, clinical interest. That's one pretty straightforward example. In the tobacco area, you know, it's a complicated, very charged set of issues. And I think to understand the nuances of what we're going into in this new era of vaping, there's going to need to be a lot of public discussion about what it means as the transition is being made from combustible tobacco to vaping, and where the line should be drawn. That's not purely a science issue. It needs to be heavily informed by science, but there are going to be a lot of societal opinions that need to be brought out.
So I want to get to tobacco in a bit, but I don't want to. On the report, you just said that the facts of the report seemed essentially right. Do you have faith in the people involved? Do you have faith in
Absolutely.
Patrizia Cavazzoni, Billy Dunn?
I talked with Dr. Cavazzoni multiple times a week. She is brilliant. You know, she was filling some big shoes with Janet Woodcock, and I think she's doing a great job. Billy Dunn, I used to interact with a lot, you know, for a number of years. He has been a champion of patient groups, has had, you know, many interactions out in the community, and I think he's a great scientist and regulator, and with a lot of clinical feeling. So, short answer is yes.
But, so you've recently pushed for some changes to accelerated approval. Look as if they're going through. Isn't one of them that with an accelerated approval, the confirmatory trial should be started?
Yes.
So wasn't that not the case in this case with Agile?
That's why we push for a change in the way it's done. I mean, now, you know, requiring that by the FDA, you know, most of the accelerated approvals didn't have trials that had started. As you well know, in my area, which is a bit different, you know, if you take the lipid area, it was the standard that you would pick a population like familial hyperlipidemia for a targeted trial, but then you would start the big outcome trial. So it's what I think is right, but that was not the standard. And, you know, we were fully behind this change. The FDA needs more teeth to make this happen. And I think, because the problem is obvious that once you've got approval, even if it's in an accelerated fashion, it is much more difficult to get that confirmatory study done for a whole variety of reasons. So I'm very happy that that legislation went through.
I want to hear more about this thought, though, and particularly with this indication in the Alzheimer's drug. How do you square this as Robert Califf, FDA Commissioner, with Robert Califf, clinical trialist? Because I have to say, I imagine Robert Califf, clinical trialist, not being happy with an FDA decision that could potentially stop several ongoing trials that would get an answer because there'd be one approved drug and several others continuing to go.
Well, that didn't happen, did it? I mean, there are a bunch of
Well, it
trials
didn't happen because
ongoing.
Medicare prevented the drug from being sold. It might have happened. People were certainly worried it would happen. The other companies were worried, I can tell you that.
That sounds like speculation to me. So, I think there was so much in it with these trials that had already been started. I wouldn't have seen the companies stopping those trials. But anyway, that's a matter of opinion. I don't know the answer to it.
But I want the answer. I'm trying to get you to answer the philosophical answer, which you're usually very willing to do. How do you? Isn't there a tension here? Am I wrong?
There's tension in like 98% of what I deal with every day. That.
Well, tell us about it, Rob.
I mean, that's why I like the job. I mean, that's why I enjoy the job. It's much like working in an ICU, right? You see a patient, they're sick. You have to make decisions with incomplete information. There's a lot of tension, but it's very meaningful. So you're asking me, what do I think the right way to do it is? And I've told you, I'm happy with the legislation. I think the standard should be you start your confirmatory trial before the decision. But that was not the standard when these decisions were made. And, it's not my job to go back and try to do Monday morning quarterbacking.
Let's go back to the question I was asking before, because I don't think you fully answered it, about the combined briefing documents. I've talked to a bunch of people who've worked for you in the past, people who've worked for other commissioners, scientists. Adam and I have both been covering the FDA for 20 years. We couldn't remember many of these combined documents. I think there have been 9 of them.
Did you talk to people in oncology? Because it's done a lot in the OCE.
I've never met Rick Pazder in my life, Fat Rob.
Where have you been?
Yeah. No, we have talked to people, and it still seemed to be a very rare practice. Is this something you're going to be doing going forward? Because it does seem troubling. It does seem to get into that gray area and maybe past it.
OCE has developed a very effective way of doing this. It's been very successful. And it doesn't mean the FDA doesn't have an independent opinion. Both opinions can be represented, and where there's agreement, it's there. And I think it brings out another issue about advisory committees. I think most people that have been involved in them realize there's a lot of information to digest in a very short period of time. Maybe this isn't the best way to do it, but it is really important that we figure out how to get information in briefing documents so that the time of the advisory committee actually is well spent. And one of the problems is, I don't think you'd be telling the truth if you denied this happens. You get a bunch of people in the room, it's a complicated set of issues. You get to the end of the day and they have to take a vote. If you had another 2 days, it could have been well spent, but you don't have that. And I think solving that problem is going to be a big part of what we need to do with such complex diseases and such complex information.
I'm going to give the audience a chance to ask some questions on this in a minute. But I want to talk a little more about this issue with the. You're saying do you think you're going to be doing it more? I mean, do you think this is you're saying the FDA doesn't have the? I mean, what I'm used to is Tom Fleming, the statistician, looks at the FDA report and the company report, which are different and independent. Tom was on a lot of FDA panels, and new data emerges in real time because the panelists care and they've got a deadline. I mean, I guess the worry we hear from people is they're worried about losing a lot of what works in that system.
There's no way on my watch we're going to lose what works in that system. I would say The advisory committee system needs repair, and it's only going to get better. But we have to examine all the different alternatives as we go through this. I mean, maybe you think it works perfectly the way it's been.
I don't think anything works perfectly. I can answer that with no drop in journalistic neutrality. Do we have any questions out there? I can't see, so the floor moderator will have to actually.
There's one
Over
back
here, Matt.
there.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian Swarney from Baird. Dr. Califf, thanks for being here tonight and taking questions. My question really relates to a lot of what Matt has already kind of talked about, but I'd really love more color on how you think of advisory committees and how you think they can be fixed or run more beneficially. It just seems, given the controversies around some of the vaccine decisions and Aduhelm in particular, even despite those controversies, nothing yet has changed under the leadership. Like a look at lecanemab, which got approved last Friday. Obviously, Aduhelm was very controversial. It was approved under the same Subpart H pathway. The advisory committee there, to a T, pretty much is in objection to the FDA's decision to approve Aduhelm on Subpart H. Why not do an AdCom on lecanemab and sort of try to restore credibility here? And I guess the same question is why are we seeing sort of diminishing rates of AdComs across some of the more controversial data sets that the FDA reviews?
I can only understand about every third word.
The basic question was why not do an AdCom on lecanemab? There is still so much controversy about this pathway, and again, how do we square that with getting the best medical
Stay tuned.
evidence?
There's more to this story to come.
Okay. But again, I do want to throw back at you something you've said to me so many times over the years. So I just want to. You know this line, if you lined up all the RCTs that have been done, finish it. Do you want to? Placebo starts to look pretty good.
Yeah.
So I mean, are we moving away from this? I mean,
No. I mean, I think if you look, I don't know what GSK's latest numbers are, but if you look at the industry as a whole, it's still more than an 80% failure rate. And that's after you get into human clinical
it's
trials.
still 90, Rob.
What's that?
It's still 90.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't think we're going backwards at all. I do think one of the most important aspects is what you brought up. Accelerated approval by definition has more uncertainty. The reason that's allowed is because people who have illnesses and their families have spoken very loudly to Congress, appropriately, I think, and said we're willing to take more risk to have earlier access to a treatment that may be beneficial. But we have to deliver on the second part of that deal, which is we have to prove whether or not that's the case. And that has been a failing of the system. We now have the teeth that we need to make sure that that happens. And I think that's really important.
Does that mean that you didn't have the teeth to make sure that happened before?
Right. It wasn't the standard.
Is that going to lead to more accelerated approvals?
I don't think so. I think they'll probably stay at about the same level.
I mean, another thing you've said is that, there's no, this was something you said at the Milken Conference recently, that there's no question the U.S. is the innovator for the world, and we're getting things out very quickly through accelerated approvals, but our life expectancy is 5 years shorter than the average of other high-income countries. You said it.
It's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, should we be pulling back on accelerated approval?
I think that's what's the right word? Non sequitur. Both are true, but that's not the issue.
Okay, let's take another question. I'm assuming we have one out there.
Hi,
I need
Dr.
a baseball
Califf.
cap.
Hi, I'm right here. You can't see me. Dr. Califf.
Could you identify yourself again?
Yeah, I'm Anand Parikh, CEO of Fight Therapeutics. Dr. Califf, I think there's a brewing crisis in clinical trial enrollment. I think it's a crisis that's not going to arrive at your door until you see decreased NDAs in a couple of years, but I'm curious whether this is something that's on the radar of the FDA or whether it's kind of something that's business as usual and something for sponsors to sort out.
You said there's a crisis in clinical trial enrollment. You mean people are not meeting their enrollment targets? Is that what you're...
I think that's one thing. I think fundamentally academic medical centers and other sites are struggling with enrollment, but I also think there's an access issue for patients. I think everything from GCP to multiple IRP approvals.
Can we get more people in clinical trials? Is that the nut of this question?
Yes, but I also think that we're going to find that there's a decrease over historical averages that have been enrolled in clinical trials over the next few years. And how do we get back to that baseline?
This is my career on the line here. You know, I mean, I started my career doing trials of 40,000 patients, and it seemed, I mean, it was hard work, but it seemed relatively easy to do. And it's definitely on my radar. All of my staff knows that it's a very high priority to try to figure out what to do. And here's where I would say accelerated approval, I think, has very little to do with the fact that we have a 5-year shorter life expectancy. The fact that we talk about patient-centered care and we have a healthcare system which is not learning, not implementing, that's what the issue is. And what we need is a system in the United States where people expect to be in a learning system, contributing to knowledge that will help themselves and others. Okay, that's sort of a broad statement. How do we approach it? You know, there are like 5 different things going on. Obviously, decentralized trials is a part of it. In the digital world we now live in, there's no reason why people in rural America or away from academic medical centers shouldn't be participating in clinical trials. But there are also a whole host of other very pragmatic things that need to be done. I've been away for about 5 years from running big clinical trials. I almost fell out of my chair in my first visit to Houston where they said, we still have 25-page consent forms. Well, if we got 25-page consent forms, it's hardly a surprise that people are not exactly signing up for the trials or that they're so expensive. And so there are a whole host of things. And Matt, you wrote a brilliant article about this. I shouldn't compliment you. You've been rough on me tonight. But you wrote a brilliant article about this. I would say that 95% of people who are really experts in clinical trials completely agree on what needs to be done. The problem right now is we have a healthcare system which financially disincentivizes participation at all levels. I am definitely trying to take that on this year, but it's at this core intersection of things the FDA does and things that the payers do and things that the health systems do. But I think, yes, it's a crisis, but it's not a new crisis. It's something that we really need to work on. And one last thing I'll throw in. You said you haven't met Dr. Pastor yet?
Oh, I have.
Okay.
We did this at ASCO.
Okay, it's come to his attention that he may have talked about this, that oncology trials are now very noticeably enrolling not so much in the U.S.
That we have talked to him about that too.
And with our new NCI director, we're going to see a lot of activity in oncology in this regard, so stay tuned.
We definitely will. I want to give you, yeah? Okay.
Hi, Rini McCarthy, CEO of Stealth Biotherapeutics. So applaud the FDA for actually re-embracing the accelerated approval pathway and couldn't agree more that putting some teeth in it is important in order to ensure sponsor delivery on commitments. But when we talk about patients expressing risk versus benefit, when we talk about the loudness of those voices, it seems there might be some inequities, as it were, right? When we think about the ultra-rare diseases, where maybe those patient voices don't get heard quite as much. And so my question is, what is the FDA doing to probably more like standardize their approach to ultra-rare diseases in the context of accelerated approval? They do kind of offer unique challenges.
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, I didn't expect Matt to get totally stuck on Aduhelm because he would ask so many good questions like that if he was given the opportunity to do it. Let me just say I'm very excited about this. And as I think you know, in PDUFA 7, there's a big increase in budget for CBER. We're going to hire a bunch of people in the area of cell and gene therapy and work really hard on the ultra-rare disease problem. As I've already said, I mean, my history is in big clinical trials and big common diseases, which I think are actually being neglected now. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take on this area where there's so much to be gained. So programs like the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium, you know, will break some new ground. And I wish I could tell you I have the recipe for what to do, but I can assure you this is going to be a really interesting, serious effort to get to the bottom of how you deal with it when you know you're not going to have adequate numbers for the kind of evidence that we're used to, but people can't wait like 60 years for a treatment when the mortality rates in 5 years are high. And so one more link here to the big trials, I think, is the solution to a lot of problems that concern a lot of people is to have much better long-term follow-up. And now, as the digital world of electronic health records, et cetera, is moving along, there's no reason, for example, why in multiple areas we shouldn't have really good long-term follow-up to know what the risks and benefits are over time. Many other aspects of this, but thanks for the question.
Well, I know as a much bigger basketball fan than I am, you know about running out the clock, but I also promised you that we could get back to tobacco. So if you want to, we can talk about tobacco and vaping for a minute. Is it possible to give me another few minutes on the clock? Yes, okay. So it's up to you. You game?
Definitely.
All right. So, I mean, there was an audit of the Tobacco Center that also raised some challenges. What are your next steps for concretely? You've spoken passionately again and again about the scourge here as a cardiologist, but what are the next steps for dealing with this problem and figuring this out?
So first, just to make sure everybody's aware, because I think we forget about this, almost 500,000 Americans are going to die this year from tobacco-related illness. There is nothing that would have a bigger impact on death rates from cancer and heart disease in this country than getting rid of combustible tobacco. So there are really three aspects to this.
Everybody clap. Come on, everybody.
Number one, we hired a great tobacco center director who's coming in. He's an epidemiologist. I think he's already doing a great job. Number two, we had a lot of process issues in the center that needed to get fixed, and I won't go into details there. I just want to acknowledge it's in the report. There's a lot of work to do. I mean, who would have thought that when the law was passed about vaping, that there would be 8 million products that would have to be. Can you imagine CEDAR dealing with 8 million drugs all at one time? And so we're having to work out systems to deal with that. But number three, we have some foundational rules that are going through now, getting rid of flavored tobacco, getting rid of flavored cigars, and there's an interesting one of reducing the nicotine in products below the addictive levels. That is the really big deal. We'll see how that one does. We're going to work really hard on it. But so much of the work really needs to be in the local community. I noticed California passed some pretty good laws. And we also need to understand the role of vaping in adults who need to quit. And not that I promote my own writing, but we just had an article in JAMA, and this is something I'm really serious about. I think everyone can now in America is aware that when someone's addicted to opioids, for example, they need care that goes well beyond just a routine clinic visit. Turns out people addicted to nicotine who are using tobacco products where the reduction in death and cancer happens very quickly once they stop. So many of these people have other issues. If you look at them on average, they have less insurance, they're more likely to live alone, very high rates of depression and anxiety, very high rates of serious mental illness. And they need the same sort of total care package that people who are addicted to opioids need. But our health systems are not paying a lot of attention. And I understand that because when I first came to FDA as a practicing cardiologist, I just thought, we know you shouldn't smoke. We got ways to help people stop. We've licked the problem. But let me tell you, we haven't. And I hope that there'll be sort of a broader recognition of what needs to be done. Part of it is FDA's issue in the center, but also developing, I wish we had drug development and helping people deal with addiction. I love the, product development, but we got in addiction of all kinds, the industry's not doing too well. So we got to pick that up.
All right. One sentence, what do you want people to remember about your second commissionership?
I hope they don't remember me. I hope that they look at it and say, the FDA is really making a difference for public health in America and around the world, and it's recognizable. I'll say one more sentence about this because
You can't get Rob Califf to say one sentence.
I'm trying.
All right,
trying.
I think we do have to go now.
But
so.
let me just say, we're in an unprecedented era of mistrust in governments, authorities, science, federal agencies. And I was surprised you didn't ask about this, but I hope all of you will spend a little time every day combating misinformation. And I'm not talking about debates about Aduhelm. Let's have those debates. That's not misinformation, that's differences of opinion. But there is information out there that's causing people to make decisions that are killing them. And if we don't stand up against that, shame on us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Califf. And next, for a sponsored discussion, please welcome to the stage John Lepore, Senior Vice President, Head of Research, GSK, and Dr. Fyodor Urnov, Scientific Director, Innovative Genomics Institute, Professor, MCB Department, UC Berkeley, and Scientific Co-Founder, Tune Therapeutics, moderated by Rick Burke.
Thanks. Didn't you love the two of them? They should take their show on the road, I think. There's a little tension, but it's a lot of affection too, kind of both. So I love hearing the two of them. So great to be with both of you here, and I want to take us back to 2019, which is sort of the genesis of what we're going to talk about, which is we had a STAT event here in San Francisco that announced this partnership, and I'll read the story we wrote about it, with a new deal to use CRISPR to hunt for new drugs. The drug maker GSK and the leading academic gene editing researchers it's collaborating with are embarking on the first of its kind partnership, which is the Laboratory for Genomic Research. So how's it going? It's been since 2019. How's it going? And tell us about how this partnership came about in the first place.
Yeah, maybe I'll kick that off, Rick. First of all, thanks for hosting this, and pleasure to chat about this very exciting collaboration and be here with my partner, Fyodor. I just want to anchor back to the last discussion because I think both Matt and Rob outlined the rationale for the genesis of this collaboration, which is the point Matt made about when you go into phase one, historically it's been about 10%. So 90% failure, which is just not sustainable. We're all suffering it. It's a terrible challenge. And the second thing is we started thinking about drug targets I talked about earlier. It's become clear that for potential targets that we're interested in, we only know the function of about half of them. And you can open up so much opportunity for disease intervention by understanding the function of these novel genes. And what we did is set up this collaboration around functional genomics, and it's come a long way. I think Fyodor might be better at describing the lab physically, but I can tell you as a collaboration, one of the things we've been able to do now is start 15 joint programs that are across a range of things. First of all, we're not doing CRISPR therapeutics. What we're doing is the application of CRISPR to really understand the biology of disease, and so we could find the best drug targets of the future. And these 15 projects aren't only about targets, they're also about novel technologies, so novel applications of CRISPR that we're basically incubating. And the goal is to really teach the world these new technologies, and we're going to make them public. We're disseminating them. Our first paper together is about to be put out in the coming weeks. And we think, as all boats rise on the use of this technology, we'll be able to find these better targets of the future and address this POS problem.
And if I could add, let's do a thought experiment, folks. If after this event, you, instead of going back to Union Square, you go a mile the other way, you'd walk into a lab, and all of you have been inside a research lab, the likes of which you've never been before, for two separate reasons. Number one, you will see a room-full-size device, which we, not very creatively, but lovingly call the rig. And it's a unique constellation of automation and CRISPR technology that allows us to address precisely the problem that John and Commissioner Califf just discussed, which is, how do we leverage the fact that it's raining evidence, harder than it rained on Sunday, that genes drive disease. But what do we do about that? How do we get to better medicines? So that rig is built to interrogate gene by gene everything that the human genome tells us about disease susceptibility and protection in sophisticated cell models. And critically, this is the glory of collaborating between academia with its drive towards the next best thing and industry with its ability to industrialize. The rig is built to be nimble to innovation, so we can plug and play new devices, new insight, new technologies. But the other unique feature about the lab is the people running the rig. And there you have about 40 scientists, and to me it's a deeply heartwarming experience. And one of them, the director, is here today, Dr. Laurelyn Prishbula, to have UC Berkeley, UCSF, and GSK scientists working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in that sense of shared mission that we have a unique opportunity to do sort of, if you will, a 1 + 1 = 7 synergistic arithmetic between the best of academia and the best of industry to really point the way to better medicines.
Can you give an example when you said it's collaborating brings you to greater heights when you can work together? What is it that you bring to each other that you wouldn't have if you embarked on this on your own?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab at that. And first, on your point about the three parties working together, this is not a joke. I actually visited recently, and I wasn't sure which of the people worked for me in GSK and which were part of the UC collaborators, which is a tremendous sort of camaraderie that's been established in collaborative spirit. But on your question about some more meat on the bone about why is this so important? I was reflecting on common disease that Commissioner Califf talked about, where the causes of rare disease are often understood. They're very difficult to treat, but the molecular target is very clear. Common diseases share a feature where there are many, many different molecular targets, probably across a range of different subtypes of the disease. And to make inroads into those kinds of common diseases, it's going to be necessary to understand the function of genes in every cell type in that organ under different conditions. And what this apparatus and this group are trying to do is to figure out how do we model these different cell types and be starting to define kind of the molecular architecture of disease. And one is renal. We've got a great collaboration around renal disease. Extremely complex, many different cell types, many different pathogenesis causes of disease. And we're dissecting this out gene by gene and understanding the function.
Can we go deeper in like a case study of success so far? Like an example?
Well, ultimately success will be when GSK has an approved medicine that treats kidney disease. I don't know how to say it except to say it. I lost my dad last year, and his kidneys were a mess, and I said to the physician, "What do you have?" He says, "We don't have anything for this." And so it kind of, my heart stops in a good way when I think about the fact that a mile away is this community of GSK and UC scientists that have started with deep insight into kidney biology from a leading UCSF scholar of the organ system. And there are invisible threads, I'm quite serious about this, that run across the US to GSK in Philadelphia and across the Atlantic to GSK in the UK, where we put to full use the industrial perspective that GSK knows how to bring on the one hand, but then the deep academic insight into kidney biology. I would put you all to sleep if I took you through the science of what's being done. Bottom line is this: it's raining genetic evidence that our DNA susceptibility and protection to disease is the path to these better medicines. And I really think that this synergistic union between industry and academia is the accelerated path through the Gordian knot. You know, the human genome is enormous. Now what? It's an accelerated path, and I think kidney is a great first pass example.
Yeah, you know, some of the observations likely would have happened in an academic setting. But what's, I think, powerful here is the observation is made in the academic setting, but it's immediately in the context of drug discovery thinking that, you know, we bring to the table. So it's this real marriage of understanding the biology and the science in depth, but also having the experience in drug discovery to bring, you know, all of our deep capabilities across many different areas immediately to the program. So very powerful.
In our closing minute or so, I'm still fascinated by the sort of cultural differences between sort of an academic labs and GSK. And John said that you can't really tell them apart, but Fyodor, can you tell them apart when you go into the lab? Is there any difference between a GSK employee and one of your academic folks?
There are what we call in science phenotypic markers. There are no phenotypic markers that could tell one from the other. And to me, this camaraderie, this shoulder-to-shoulder mindset, is in fact has a special feature, and it is this. You know, as an academic professor, it thrills me that here we have UC employees learning about industrialization and scale-up from their GSK colleagues. And we have our colleagues from GSK, you know, learning on these glorious tangents that we as academic scientists love to go on. It truly, you know, I lovingly compare this to the Fellowship of the Ring, right? You need different kinds of creatures to succeed in a particular mission. And literally, there's this fellowship sensibility to the laboratory for genomics research, which I think is tremendously appealing.
And look, I'm going to painfully extend your metaphor. The ring is a medicine that's going to be helpful to somebody. And we just, you know, I think what really drags these people together in their inability to tell them apart is they're all got passion to really think about how do we bring this vision to life of a new way of understanding the function of genes, defining it in specific cell types, and leading to the medicines of the future. So very exciting to be doing that with you.
Perfect ending to end with the Lord of the Rings. So thank you so much, both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think back to Matt Herper.
All right. For our final trick, I'd like to welcome two people who don't need introduction, but they can come up and be introduced or whatever. You guys have mics over there, so I'll take this chair. Yeah. So Allison DeAngelis, Biotech Startups and Venture Capital Reporter, Stat. And Adam Forrestein, Mr. JP Morgan himself, Senior Writer, Biotech, Stat.
This is the why are you still here portion of the evening. Why aren't you at a better party than this?
We do have, the bar I think is still open though.
Yeah, that's why
I had to pry this out of their hands.
Did you? What is it?
I don't know, it's some
It's
Some
a day
beer
shoots?
with hops in it?
Yeah.
So how's your JP Morgan, Adam? He's waiting for he's looking at his watch, waiting for this to end.
No, I got up at 2:30 this morning. I'm a very early riser normally, like 5:30. That's 2:30.
Yeah. I woke up
Pacific time.
I woke up at 7 and Adam said, "Well, good afternoon. It's about time you joined us."
Because I was already working for hours.
I think
And just to clarify, so we have a rented house that a bunch of stat people are staying in. That's
it's
why.
a verbo. Yeah, no, Adam woke me up and then I went back to bed. So what's your big takeaway so far from day one of JPM? You know, this is obviously going to set the tone of the entire year and is actually really critically important, even though everyone will change their minds in a week.
I mean, it was an okay news. Like, you know, you wake up the Monday morning of JP Morgan, obviously you want a lot of news. We did have like these 3 smallish acquisitions that, you know, were probably not individually all that meaningful industry-wide.
And the biggest
but,
one, the company had $500 million in cash. So
yeah, but like, you know, but like, I mean, you know, one of the big complaints of last year was, you know, M&A not being up to the typical standards, and particularly when it comes to deal volume. And so, like, maybe that's a nice indication that we will have deals. And I will say that I think one of the big complaints about biotech, publicly traded biotech, is that there are just too many biotech companies out there. There's 500, 600, 700 of them, and that there needs to be contraction of that number. And so companies that maybe don't need to be independent but could be rolled up into larger companies is a good trend, and we should see more of that.
I had that, like, a very similar conversation today with a VC who was saying that they're kind of like theory for what we're going to see as this market tightens is kind of a return to the days where, like, in like the 2000s, like 20, you know, first half of the 2010s, where you would kind of have a lot of the talent concentrated in like 2 companies in each area that would be like direct competitors, like the Alnylam versus the Dicerna, and they would have the best talent, they would have all the assets, you know, and would be able to kind of move forward better than this class where we now will have 10 companies that are chasing similar targets, that are dividing the talent amongst all of them. And it does, I mean, I feel like we've had this conversation for the last year where there like almost like needs to be like a natural, you know, like, I don't want to say culling of the herd, but like, you know, there's too many biotechs.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the lessons from our publication is that it's good to be at a place where all the stars are, right? But I was talking to another venture capitalist. I was talking to Bob Nelson, and he said that he thinks that that this is all that in this new era, it's going to come down more to management than a lot of the other things that you've traditionally bet on in VC. That it's all about having the right management team and all of them there to execute from the beginning. So
I spend a lot of time talking to, you know, buy-side investors, you know, who mostly obviously invest in companies, and they really can't stand, generally as a rule, they just can't stand VCs these days. Like, they just think, you know, why are you pushing out these super early stage companies that, you know, just clog up
with
space
billions of dollars in funding and no products, and
they get mad.
But I do have to contend, Adam, has there been a time period where, you know, buy-side folks have been really, really pro-VC?
There was like a week in 2011.
Oh, okay, sorry. So we'll go back to that week. Okay.
We got some questions out there? You want to ask us stuff?
We have 20 minutes on this clock, guys.
I mean,
so
I
come
can
on.
run it down. We can stop early, too, and I have a few other questions for them. But if you guys want to, like, get in and just, like, throw up a hand. Yeah?
Some questions.
Hey, I'll do it, Britt.
Allison, could you speak to why you think there are too many biotechs? I mean, speaking from the world of genomic therapies, you've written brilliantly about the fact that, you know, in the same week we can have an approval for a CRISPR medicine for sickle cell disease, and a different company pursuing a similar approach has a severe adverse event. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'd just like to learn more about your thinking as to why you think that in high areas of great innovation you need, you know, Alnylam versus Dicerna.
I mean, I kind of go back to the thought process that at the founding of these companies, I mean, what is fueling a lot of these companies is the great amounts of capital that have been put in to the, you know, venture ecosystem. You know, those firms all need to deploy a lot of capital, and usually that means a lot of investments and also very, very large investments. I don't know that there's anything intrinsically to be said about, you know, whether you have a lot of biotechs or a few amount of select biotechs that leading to better scientific outcomes. But I think it kind of comes back to what, you know, the person that I was saying the VC that I was talking to over at Andreessen this afternoon was saying, like, the idea that if you have less, if you have fewer startups, there's at least like the idea that you are coalescing more of the talent in fewer teams instead of spreading it around, if that makes sense. Yeah.
But there's also a risk. Editas tried to roll up all the gene editing, and aren't we kind of glad they didn't?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Well, look, I mean, we saw it today. I think we saw it today. Is this on? Do you hear this?
Yep. I just have Allison say
Hello.
it like that.
There we go.
There we go.
We saw today the major restructuring of Editas, right?
Yeah.
That's like an OG CRISPR company, which has now essentially gone back to like preclinical and given up its, the stuff that it was founded upon. Now that's going to happen, right? We're going to have those kinds of setbacks. But I noted, I saw in their restructuring that they're going to focus on their sickle cell. And you're like, really? I mean, do we need another sickle cell genome editing therapy? No, we do not.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's going to be one that's going to be like heads and shoulders above the others, but we've got a lot of them now,
Odds of actual price competition in gene editing?
I'm sorry, you were echoing and I didn't.
Odds of actual price competition in gene editing?
Well, that would be fascinating, wouldn't it? I mean, we may get a situation, I was going to say next year, it's actually this year. We could get a situation like that, right? Because we could have a CRISPR treatment for sickle cell approved and a gene therapy. Different technology deliveries, systems, and I'm not a big CRISPR guy. I call you for help when I need that stuff. But again, that will be fascinating to watch, won't it, if both of them get approved at relatively the same time, because they're going to be submitted to the FDA at relatively the same time. Well, that's be really fascinating to watch this year, is competition among these gene editing, gene therapy treatments for the same disease.
Hi, Jonah Comstock with PharmaForum. I'll stand up. Everywhere I go today, I've been hearing about the Inflation Reduction Act and the devastating...
Wait, sorry, can I ask you to slow down? There's a little bit of an echo.
The problem is there's like a weird echo.
Got it. So everywhere I go today, I've been hearing about the Inflation Reduction Act and how devastating it's going to be for pharma companies, especially small molecule pharma companies. As you can imagine, it's a pretty one-sided version of the narrative here. So I would love to hear what you guys think about the real impact of that and how it's going to play out.
I have had multiple conversations in the last week, and another one today around this very topic with VCs who, honestly, behind closed doors are really not thinking that there's going to be much of an impact in the IRA in their plans. I know of, a couple of really top tier VCs that have multiple small molecule companies that are going to be launching this year. That is not dissuading them. I think that they understand, and the person that I was talking to from Andreessen today had said that they know that the initial target for Congress and for Medicare when they begin negotiating these drug prices is going to be the pharmas that have an established small molecule blockbuster drug on the market. They know that there's a lot of time before they really feel any impact from this. I do lean towards the Inflation Reduction Act, kind of fear-mongering being a little bit of fear-mongering. That's my personal take.
I don't know if you care about the investment side, but I was talking to an investor the other day about this, and she made 2 points. One, and I think other people have made this point too, is one of the unintended consequences of the IRA is that the launch price of drugs will go up. Because if companies realize that they have a finite period of time or a shorter period of time to recoup their investment, well, they will just price drugs higher at the beginning to try to make more money to recoup that investment. So you could actually have higher drug prices because of the IRA. The second point she made was that in some respects it will be easier and cleaner to value companies because you know when the patent life on a drug, you know when it ends. Like right now, there's all kinds of extensions, and so you risk adjust and you make probabilities about the value of a drug over a longer period of time. With the IRA in place, you basically have a finite period of time where that drug, where you can assess the value of it. So she thought that was another interesting consequence of it.
I agree it's fear-mongering to an extent, but I also think it's, and pharma was actually making that exact point. They were kind of, one of their arguments was sort of, this will result in higher prices. It's not our fault, but it'll result in, but.
Of course it's not their fault.
Well, but I do believe that for the big pharma guys who I've been talking to, there is an effect in their long-term, in whether you invest, for instance, in having a lot of small molecule chemists or a lot of large molecule chemists. I'm skeptical that anyone like a VC is ever going to. You always think your thing is the best thing ever, and if you've got a great cancer target, you're gonna develop it. But in cases where multiple targets are tractable and you have other options, and we've seen that already. I mean, look at the amount of large molecule we have because of the incentives that are already there for being a large molecule. You essentially never go fully generic. There's all sorts of biological advantages, so it probably does enhance that. Do we have another one out there? Yeah. Well, please.
Uh-oh, the boss has a question.
Since it's titled A Serving of Stat, I'd like to know a little more about how you guys do your job here at JPM. There's a million things you could cover. Can you tell everyone a little bit about how you decide what to cover?
We get up very early.
Yes.
How do we do our jobs here at Stat? You know, it's funny, I felt like, and I was saying this to you, that I felt like I was out of practice because I hadn't been here for 3 years. And so I'm like, so like today, for instance, I way over planned my day. Like I thought I was very ambitious and I was going to do all these things. And then I realized that, you know, it was like afternoon. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. I didn't get, you know, I
didn't do anything. I
was
didn't get
running.
anything
No, I
done.
did a lot of stuff in the morning, but then I was sort of ran out of gas in the afternoon and ran out of time. And because partly is just, you know, our editors are on the East Coast. And so my editor was like, where's that story you were going to file? And it was like 6 o'clock already.
That happens every JPM here, but I underplanned my day deliberately, and I still canceled
That's
something.
smart.
Oh my God.
I still canceled something, Adam.
I'm gonna rejigger my day tomorrow.
Am I the only one who, like, I got to a meeting early today. I don't know how I did that because I was going back and forth from the Westin to meetings. I've completely jinxed myself. Tomorrow's going to fall apart.
I did that because I was coming from where we're staying, and it was just so hard to get a car that I left an extremely large amount of time.
Yeah, and to answer Rick's question a little bit more directly, I think I try to use this meeting as a spring, both obviously to cover the news, you know, Monday morning, particularly as things come out. And so we want to have the site look really fresh with new news on it. But then I also try to use this meeting as a springboard for future reporting. So for me, particularly, you know, I focus on public companies. So I spent most of today inside the Westin, hearing and listening to companies and listening to CEOs. They make their presentations just to kind of get a sense of, you know, what they're talking about, what their goals and milestones are for the year, and thinking about potential future stories that I may want to write. That's something that Rick will be very happy about. Like, you know, there'll be more stories coming. So that's kind of, I try to sort of do a mix of that. I mean, I think we have to, you know, somewhat justify our trip here and like keep this, you know, write stories, and we do that. But also try to think about, gather material maybe for something in the future.
Yeah, so far in day one, there's been, several conversations that I'm like, I know I'm going to follow up on that next week for like a more in-depth story. And then there's also like me sitting in on private company presentations for startups that's like, you know, this might be their first time really talking publicly about what they're doing. Let's get a look, you know, finally look under the hood. Then, you know, kind of meeting with people that I, you know, haven't seen in several years because of the pandemic or because of geographic distance. Build, you know, kind of like fostering those relationships.
I also spend time making sure that Matt writes stories. because Matt will be like, should I write that story? And I'm always
hasn't
like,
happened
yes,
once
write that story, Matt.
This hasn't happened once. I'm the one who wrote so biggest moment of JPM so far.
You mean here this week?
This
we
day,
just got
yeah.
here.
So far, day one. What's your either
The biggest moment was
or crystallizing
the biggest moment was I took her to my favorite taqueria in the Mission on Sunday.
The biggest moment was Adam realizing that his favorite pizza place had closed down
It did.
and grabbing the chain link doors out in front and like shaking them in sorrow.
I was sad.
Yeah.
No,
I'm gonna name two that are actually like
I saw the new Biogen CEO today speak, Chris Vivaker.
He's a good speaker.
He's a really good speaker, and he's
Really good
very.
speaker.
He has this sort of very relaxed style of speaking.
He has a relaxed swagger.
But a lot of CEOs like kind of get very tense and like almost sort of the alpha male aggressive thing. I think maybe nerves combined with whatever, too much caffeine. But like Chris was up on stage and he's like, just like, hey, how's it going? I appreciated it. It was really nice.
Between that and like Vaz wearing like a shirt without the tie, the scene that you described in the newsletter today, are we entering a more casual?
Vaz
has been like that since he joined. I did a whole interview with him about blue jeans.
Vaz was wearing jeans today.
He's been like, that was like one of his big things at Novartis was that everyone was going to get to wear jeans.
I thought that was kind of cool. He was wearing jeans. Yeah,
it's
like
a few years
nice jeans, but yeah, jeans.
My big moment was Novavax has a new CEO. I think that's one of the more interesting, they accomplished something almost impossible in developing a COVID vaccine as a small company and then
blew up.
Did a lot wrong and a lot went wrong. And so it's very interesting to see. It's obviously bringing in somebody from outside means something. It's interesting to find out if there's a way of making the good work for them and not the bad.
And I did delete a lot of emails today of, if you have any time, do you want to meet for coffee? And unfortunately, it's hard to do, but I've got a lot of those in the inbox.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're all like desperately trying to flag Ubers and get in some sort of semblance of a meal in the downtime. Anytime, I
have barely eaten today.
I canceled a lunch to make myself lunch.
But there's 2 more days. There's 2 more days. I mean, we're here. I'm here Tuesday, Wednesday. You're here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And you're here Tuesday, Wednesday,
Thursday?
Wednesday.
But it's generally let me take a poll. How do people feel about being back here? Do you...
Yeah.
Do you like it? Cheer.
Do you cheer if you
cheer if this sucks?
I mean, are you? And
okay.
And I have to say, no one was wearing masks. Was anyone in the Westin today? No one was wearing masks. Even I was like, I didn't wear one either.
I wore a mask. I was solo.
I think the general rule is don't test yourself for COVID. You don't want to know. Wait till you get home.
Okay, wait, so question for you two. What do you want to see? What do you want in the next 2 days?
Well, we have had JP Morgan's where there was a whole bunch of big news on Tuesday. It has happened.
Why are you jinxing
good.
us?
If we wake up tomorrow morning for other big news, that would be good.
I mean, I would rather, if you've got that big news, email any one of us. Right now, we will honor the embargo. We'd
Only
rather
us.
get it now, please. But yeah, it would be neat. I like it when there's news.
But I think generally the people that I've encountered today and Sunday are in a good mood, though. I think people are generally happy to be here. I mean, despite the weather, which has not been... Well, I mean, today was okay, I guess, in the afternoon.
Today was actually really nice.
But I think generally people, I think people after not being here for 3 years are...
Looks like we have a question.
...are happy
We
to
have
be
an
here.
actual question, Adam, so I'm going to interrupt you about your happy
Hi.
talk.
Hi, I'm Ashok Amaduri. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Target Site Therapeutics. First of all, thank you for doing your reporting. I really enjoy all 3 of you reporting. Keep them coming. So question is, Adam, you said there are too many biotech companies, right? Do you see any trend in that small molecules, large molecules, cell gene therapy, or do you see trend in the disease areas they're focusing on? Curious to know your thoughts.
I mean, it's hard for me to answer that question just because, because I focus on publicly traded biotech companies. By the time, I don't, Allison has much more visibility into the private startups than I do, because I just don't pay attention to them although I'm sort of forced sometimes to pay attention to a lot of preclinical companies because they go public, but then I sort of tend to ignore them because there's not that much to write about. I'm sort of, I'm biased towards writing about real things, real data that I can kind of sink my teeth into, and it's hard to do that when, you're talking about, rat experiments.
Too much cell therapy.
And I've been surprised to get a sense of almost an admittance that maybe, and it will be interesting to see if this actually plays out this year, but maybe as an industry we've kind of reached our zenith in investing in oncology, and we might need to diversify a little bit more instead of investing in another CDK or CD19 targeting drug. That's been a real standout for me in the 24 hours I've been on the ground. All right.
So they're not going to invest in oncology. I mean, what I've actually there's been a lot of, I've heard a lot of people talk about Pfizer's moves were actually interesting today because they're going back to being Pfizer. There was this flirtation with rare disease, and they have some rare disease, but they're like, this whole COVID, I met with Michael Dolston, and I don't have my notebook in front of me, but there was kind of a vibe of, we had this huge, giant financial success, and maybe we can do that again and have a lot more great, big, huge drugs. And so maybe we should focus on some of these big markets again. And it was interesting to see AstraZeneca. I cut my teeth covering hypertension drugs. It's been a long time since I feel like I've seen anybody buy a hypertension drug. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get, we're not going to fully go the other direction. The pendulum's not going to swing to there being no oncology investments, but I think it would be good to see a little bit of a pullback.
It would be a huge pendulum swing to have half of them be oncology investments instead of whatever it is now. It's probably 2/3.
Yeah.
We have another question.
So you mentioned cell and gene just before. My question about cell and gene, and I love hearing about the amazing breakthroughs and how great it could save all this and that. But then the minute somebody says, who's going to pay for it, the air out of the room gets sucked out. So what's your reaction to that?
I think these things do get paid for, but I do think that on cell and gene therapy, both the manufacturing issues and the price issues are going to remain limiting factors. I think it's been much harder than I expected for some of those amazing. The first time I saw CAR T data, I was just bowled over. It's really hard to get that into broad use. And somebody at the time, I think Genentech, told me, but we have these antibodies that'll kind of do the same thing. And I think they were probably right.
I think that we need that, kind of pricing fight we were referencing earlier, start to actually, particularly on the gene therapy side, get more of these out there. We've got to combat our fear in talking about the pricing, or at least the industry's fear, and really seriously figuring out who is paying for these and how.
Well, we need a mechanism for price competition, which never seems to exist in this industry.
Well, it's a big year for all that because there's gene therapy is now approved, and they have to figure out the business side of it.
Yeah, kicking and screaming.
Yeah, they have to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we can call it.
I can guess who was at Moderna's presentation today.
Oh, yeah. Anybody in the audience, can you guess?
Can you guess? Someone? Dr. Oz was at Moderna's presentation today. I don't know. If you know why, let me know.
Yeah.
Because I want to know. But he was there. He was there.
Yeah.
I have the picture to prove it. You might see it tomorrow in the newsletter.
A little sneak preview.
I mean, maybe you should just...
Rick is going to be mad at me.
Maybe you should just put that in front of the paywall as its own story. I mean, All right.
With that,
thank
we're
you
done.
so much. Thank you for being here with us in this beautiful
you.
space.
Go forth and network.
Thank you. Have fun. Oh, I'm supposed to talk about the summit? Okay, so there's a few things supposed to say. The last of them is supposed to be there's drinks downstairs. So pretend I said that last. The next one is we have our breakthrough summit coming up in May. And you want to be here, especially if you already live here. It's going to be here in San Francisco. It's in another amazing space. It's going to be so much fun. Come. Also, at the end of this week, since you're here for JP Morgan, we do have a virtual event. If you haven't signed up, it's me and Meg Terrell. That'll be fun too. Thank you so much. Thank you, GlaxoSmithKline.